Hello, my name is Tom Hogan, and we are here with George Davison today. We are recording the June 2021 slideshow. George is a native of Des Moines, Iowa, and he is going to be sharing with us today a presentation of early Iowa Interstate photographs. And George is also going to share a little bit of his background with us on sitting on the original board that oversaw the formation of the Iowa Interstate as well. Now, as a few housekeeping notes today, we had our Iowa Chapter Nevada 24-hour meet a couple of weeks ago, and that was a roaring success. Everyone that participated is obviously greatly appreciated. We have a couple of upcoming events. We're going to have a second slideshow here in the month of June, which is going to feature the Galesburg area. We're going to put that on during Galesburg Railroad Days coming up here at the end of June. And we're also going to have a Grand Mound Depot Day for anyone that wants to come out to Grand Mound, Iowa on the east end of the CNW Double Main. We are going to meet there on Saturday, June 26th. So with no further ado, I'm going to give you George Davison and a map of the Iowa Interstate. So George, please share with us your background and what we're going to be seeing here today.
Tom, thank you very, very much. And before we get underway, I want to especially thank Dave Kroger and Dana Grief, two of my friends from the Des Moines area. Dana took a number of my slides, and he was able to scan them in, and you'll see those slides as we go through today from the late 80s and early 90s on Iowa Interstate. I was appointed to the Iowa Railway Finance Authority by Governor Robert Ray back in the, about a year after it was formed. A friend of mine, Mark Wampler, left the board to become an administrative law judge for the state of Iowa. There was a vacancy. I put my name in, and I was appointed. Served on the Railway Finance Authority with some very, very good individuals. Charlie Crawford of Adair Feed and Grain out in Adair, Iowa. Fred McKim, who was a well-known grain merchant from up in the northwestern part of the state. In fact, if I remember correctly, Fred had a locomotive on the Rock Island named after him. A fellow whose name might be familiar to many of you who are watching this presentation, O.R. or Odie Woods, who was the head man at the Crandic for many, many years, and Bill McGrath from Melrose, Iowa, who had been on the Iowa Department of Transportation Board, and Bill was asked to head up the Railway Finance Authority Board, which he graciously did. And I joined those gentlemen, and we were presented with a loan application from Heartland Rail Partners and what became Iowa Interstate Railroad for $15 million. The General Assembly, in the creation of IRFA, literally gave us back property taxes that were owed by both the Rock Island and the Milwaukee Road as part of our financing. The trustees of those two companies paid money in, and then we tried to judiciously use that money to preserve rail service in the state of Iowa. The Heartland Rail proposal, and Heartland was consisted of primarily Maytag, the Crandic Railroad, Pella Roll Screen, and Adair Feed and Grain, and there were several other entities that were part of Heartland, but those were the major players in Heartland. They were wanting to preserve the Rock Island line. Now, there were, perhaps vultures isn't the right word, but there were people who were circling and wanted that line, in effect, parceled out or abandoned in many instances. And indeed, the Chicago to Joliet section, the trustee, in effect, sold that to Metra, the commuter service in the Chicago area, with Metra allowing trackage rights for any freight service, including CSX and eventually Iowa Interstate. CSX acquired the line from Joliet to Bureau, CSX wanted to have the sand business from around Seneca and Utica on the line, but again, overhead trackage rights were preserved by the trustee and then acquired eventually by Heartland and Iowa Interstate. The line for which we were presented the loan was from Bureau over to Council Bluffs. Iowa Interstate made the proposal, or actually Heartland made the proposal, and we looked at it. Interestingly, the hearings were held during a time that I was in trial in federal court in Des Moines. So I would be in court during the day, and at night I would get up to Ames as quickly as I could and listen to the testimony. The Milwaukee Road was especially interested in carving out for itself the portion of the old Rock Island line from the Quad Cities over to Iowa City. It wanted the business. There were several, of course, very good businesses, Twin Star Steel and the Procter & Gamble operations in the Iowa City area that the Milwaukee thought it would be very beneficial to serve. I think the Crandic Railroad, if I remember correctly, was somewhat askance at the Milwaukee plan, because the Crandic was looking for a secondary outlet for its business out of the Cedar Rapids area. And it felt that if it had an entity under which it had some influence, it could affect rates and car movements. The Northwestern was interested in maybe serving Newton and the Maytag plant. I don't think it was interested in serving Pella Roll Screen down in Pella, and it especially was not interested in going west out of Des Moines. Heartland Rail Partners was interested in preserving the entire line so that it had good interchanges. It could move grain out of the west. It could move manufactured products out of the Des Moines and Newton area, as well as Iowa City and the areas around the Quad Cities. So eventually a $15 million loan was arranged by the Rail Finance Authority. Other financing was obtained, and eventually Iowa Interstate began. And there were a couple of choke points in the original railroad. Of course, I'm focusing on Iowa, and the choke points were Short Line Yard, which the Chicago and Northwestern controlled. Trains would sit over at East 18th as they were headed eastbound. They'd sit at the east limits of the Short Line Yard as they were headed westbound, depending upon when the yardmaster at Short Line would let them through. There was track between McClellan and Peter on the old Chicago Great Western into the Council Bluffs area. And that track was a choke point. In fact, the Northwestern was wanting to tear that out and abandon it because all the Rock Island had to give to Iowa Interstate at that point, Heartland Rail Partners, were trackage rights. Well, eventually that was resolved. And then track through downtown Des Moines, the old Emmons St. L. And again, it was a trackage rights, overhead rights situation. And the Northwestern was interested in trying to make life as difficult as it could for Iowa Interstate, or so it seemed. I don't want to irritate my good friend Dana Grief, who is in my opinion, probably one of the most knowledgeable fellows around about the Chicago and Northwestern and its operations. I'm merely talking about the politics of the Chicago and Northwestern. One aside, if I might, if you look into the early history of the Rock Island, and this probably should have happened, but the powers who were at the time were not willing to do this. The Rock Island and the Northwestern had boards of directors that interlocked, if you will. They had members of the boards that were on each board. There was serious talk about making it one railroad. I've seen observations made that had that occurred, you would have had one very, very strong railroad through the Middle West, and it would have had some tremendous capacity to serve the public and to make money for the investors and shareholders. Well, let's take a look at the Iowa Interstate as it was back in the late 1980s and the early 1990s. And our first picture is of locomotive 402. This is downtown at the Des Moines Depot, and we're on November the 3rd, 1988. This is going to be a ceremony marking the fact that Iowa Interstate is now officially operating through downtown Des Moines, that there's been rehabilitation of the downtown Des Moines tracks, issues with the Northwestern have more or less been put aside about use of the downtown tracks. And we have a couple of the Pathfinder passenger cars being pulled by 402. We're looking westbound at the present time with crossing gates or the crossing signals there at 4th Street and the ubiquitous light tower from the days of passenger operations in downtown Des Moines. And that light tower has always been one of my favorite structures associated with the downtown depot. Also in the background, you can see dignitaries getting ready for the ceremony. And if we can move to the next slide, Tom. Another reverse view, if you will, of 402 as it's sitting right before the crossing, and the Des Moines Depot. Of course, the Des Moines Depot has been preserved by Connie Weimer, and she has her Iowa title and business publications operations working out of the Des Moines Depot. Fascinating to think that on the first floor at one time were the waiting areas for passengers who came in from all directions on the Rock Island Railroad into downtown Des Moines. And then on the second floor of the depot were the dispatchers with some CTC operations and other ABS type of operations. I never had the opportunity to be on the second floor, but I would have enjoyed seeing that operation, as dispatching is one of the things that I find very interesting about how railroads operate. The dedication ceremony, and if we could go to the next slide, please, Tom. Oh, another picture of 402, just to give you a good look at the locomotive. I always like to take pictures of the locomotives so you can get a picture of them. Here is the dedication ceremony. At the microphones is Dr. Paul Banner. Dr. Paul Banner at the time was the head of Iowa Interstate and he had been with the Illinois Central. He then came over to the Rock Island during the last days, and Dr. Banner put together the plan for Iowa Interstate to operate the track from Council Bluffs to Bureau, and then from Bureau on using overhead rights into Blue Island Yard. The gentleman to the left of the Iowa flag is Paul Victor. Right behind Dr. Banner is Terry Branstead. I've not been able to identify the other two gentlemen, and my notes didn't include who they were. But then the gentleman in the hat, right underneath the last set of balloons, is Don Byers. And Don Byers was a very, very important part of getting Iowa Interstate into operation. Don Byers was general counsel for Maytag in Newton. And Maytag was a very important member of the Heartland partners. In fact, Mr. Byers told me at one time, Maytag has never borrowed money during the time I've been here. And now we're borrowing money so that we can get a railroad going. Maytag had a position on the Rock Island board because of its importance to the Rock Island. At the microphone here is Paul Victor. And again, this is the dedication ceremony that occurred on November the 3rd. Lots of people there at the ceremony. Of course, television coverage. You see the gentleman with the video camera on his shoulder. And this was big news. The Pathfinder, some of the Pathfinder dinner train cars being used as part of the train that was pulled into downtown Des Moines. Tom, if we could perhaps move to the next slide. And here's Paul Victor with Terry Branstead. I'm pretty sure that Harvey Sims is the gentleman to the far right in the dark colored hat. I believe that's Jean Lloyd Jones, who has her back to us in the picture. Harvey Sims was with the Iowa Department of Transportation, and Jean Lloyd Jones was in the Senate at the time and a very important backer of the Rail Finance Authority and the efforts to help to keep rail service here in Iowa on the former Rock Island lines. And we have other people who were there at the ceremony as well. If we could go to the next slide. Here's Dr. Paul Banner with Scott Bannister and Paul Victor. Scott Bannister was general counsel for Iowa Interstate. Scott's a lawyer here in the Des Moines area. And again, you see some of the other people there at the Des Moines Depot for this ceremony. Here's a picture of my good friend Jim Windsor. At the time, both Jim and I shot Leica cameras. And you see Jim's Leica around his neck. Jim worked for the Des Moines Bus Company, Des Moines MTA as it was known at the time. And Jim was a big supporter of rail service. He was a big supporter of public transportation and a pretty fair photographer from everything that I know. One of the other gentlemen, Dave Kroger and Dana Grief, identified him for me as Dan Pierce, and he was the Iowa Interstate signal guy, and you see that he has an Iowa Interstate hat on. Now let's take a look at some trains going through, in this instance, downtown Des Moines. This is near the depot, and if any of you remember traveling through downtown Des Moines in the 70s, the 80s, and the early 90s, there were a raft of tracks over around the depot. In fact, 10 tracks. During the days of passenger service, you would probably, and you could see perhaps 2, maybe 4 passenger trains on the tracks there at the downtown Des Moines Rock Island Depot. There were also side tracks where sleepers could be parked, diners could be parked and serviced. And so it was a big area for trackage in downtown Des Moines. Here's 300, a former Union Pacific locomotive, high-nosed Jeep, pulling a westbound through downtown Des Moines. 436 in the Iowa Interstate colors of black, red, and yellow. And then a former Illinois Central Jeep, a Paducah Rebuild, as you can tell with the horseshoe air filter on the top. 436, also a Paducah Rebuild. Another shot of 300. This one is taken on December the 14th of 1988. We are out by the Meredith plant, again headed westbound. The dirt and grime shows the outline of where the Union Pacific Herald had been on locomotive 300. 473, another ICG Jeep, one of the many that Iowa Interstate started operations with. And this is a grain train headed westbound on December the 14th of 1988. Here's the Iowa City Depot. And there's a group of dignitaries gathered in front of the depot. Unfortunately, I did not record the date of this picture, but the Iowa City Depot, a nice preservation effort for it in Iowa City. One of the Rock Island design that you'll see again and again along the line here in the state of Iowa. The turret, cupola, and operator's bay is, in my opinion, somewhat unique to the structures that the Rock Island built. This was a strong, sturdy structure, in my opinion. The tile roof is in good condition, and you've got the order boards in good condition there at Iowa City. The engine house at Iowa City. This was taken on July 26th of 1988. At the time, Iowa City was one of the hubs of operation for Iowa Interstate. 464 is in the locomotive shop and undergoing repairs. And I've always liked to shoot locomotives if I can find them in repair facilities, just to give a chance to show the extraneous materials that are around. Those are what make railroading.
So the Iowa Interstate doesn't do any work in Iowa City now. They've moved their entire operation out to South Amana in this area.
Yes. And, well, I have to confess, I haven't been around the Iowa City yards for several years. And so I've not even had a chance to take a look and see what the status of the shop is. I mentioned when we showed the Grinnell Depot, when we showed the Iowa City Depot, that you'd see that turret design again. Here it is at Grinnell. And I'm on the ground, In the background, you see a blue Chrysler. That's a little Chrysler New Yorker built off the K car frames. And this is the Emmons-St. L crossing. We're looking westbound. The second main through Grinnell has been removed. And the depot is boarded up. But you can tell that it was still a very solid structure for a town the size of Grinnell. It does not have the addition that's on the Iowa City Depot. So you have the operator's bay can look at the Emmons-St. L tracks and the Rock Island tracks. And I've always found this to be a very interesting station from the perspective of taking pictures and how things are located. Here we're looking at the depot. I'm on the west side now, and we're looking east. Get a good shot there of the diamond, where the Rock Island and the Emmons-St. L crossed. And as I recall, the diamond was controlled for many years by the operator inside the depot there at Grinnell. On a special trip, I was able to get a cab ride and was on board the cab. We're approaching the Grinnell Depot, and here you get a shot of the depot as we're getting ready to cross the diamond as we're headed westbound toward Newton. We're now at Altoona. And Altoona has always been a fun place, as far as I'm concerned, to go out and watch trains. Here's 403 with 400 in the background and another Illinois Central Jeep. 400, of course, the ubiquitous Rock Island locomotive that showed up on the Iowa Interstate. We'll talk about 400 a little bit more when we've got it on the point of a couple of trains that are going to show up. When I'm taking pictures, yes, I like to have the locomotive, but I also like to have the other things that are in the background, because I think that shows the purpose of the railroad and what it's doing, as opposed to just a shot of a locomotive and you count the rivets.
So I find this interesting because we see that even in the very earliest days of the Iowa Interstate, they've got container on flat car traffic that they're moving across the railroad.
Yes, and that was something that they promoted. There was a video that they produced, which I have a copy, I think, if I can find where I may have put it. And it emphasized that they were running straight through, that they didn't have yards to tie up their trains, and that it was a clear poke at the Chicago and Northwestern and the Northwestern's Falcon service at the time, which the Northwestern was really promoting. Okay. Here's 430, and this is one of the grade crossings in Altoona. My notes say that Carl Seeberger is the engineer on this particular shot, which was taken on September the 30th of 1989. And again, you get a sense of the variety of locomotives that the Iowa Interstate was using back at that time. We have the Paducah Rebuild that is has the nose herald painted out and IAIS painted over, except it's because of the hard wear and tear, it's almost reverting back to the Illinois Central I. Then you've got 414. I can't make out the third locomotive, although I think that might be a leased unit. And then you have 303 on what appears to be a mixed freight. And this is westbound at one of the grade crossings just west of downtown Altoona. 468 at the east end of Short Line on August the 23rd of 1989. We're starting to see more of the Iowa Interstate locomotives in the black, red, and yellow. Yellow nose with the Iowa Interstate Herald. 408 in the consist, that may be the Union Pacific 300 in the consist. And it looks like there's another Paducah Rebuild, the fourth locomotive. Frequently, during this era, you would see 4 or 5 Jeeps pulling the Iowa Interstate freights across the state of Iowa. Here we are at Short Line Yard, and one of my friends, Gary Cochran, he's the conductor on duty and ever alert. I say that with tongue in cheek. As they're going through Short Line, and Short Line was one of the choke points. Trains had to wait to get authority to move because the yard was controlled by the Chicago Northwestern, and you couldn't move until the yardmaster said so. The Short Line was basically from East 18th Street to the east end, just beyond the big cemetery on the east side of Des Moines. Short Line Tower was one of my favorite locations. I had gotten reports that Short Line was going to be torn down. So I wanted to make sure that I had gotten out there and gotten some slides. Again, you see the blue Chrysler in the background. The young lady in the pink outfit is my daughter, and she is now 35 years old. So this shot was taken in October of 1987. You can tell that the Rock Island Heralds have been blanked out. They have not totally removed all of the lines for the CTC machine and the controls that were at Short Line Tower. You also see that a sign has been posted on one of the utility poles entering the Iowa Falls sub.
Really is,
pardon, Tom?
I'm sorry, I was just going to say it really is reminiscent of the Sioux Line treatment of Milwaukee Road engines when they painted over the Milwaukee Road after the merger.
And somewhere in the back of my mind, I recall someone telling me that some high official from the Northwestern was going to be coming in during October of 1987 and didn't want to see any Rock Island stuff. So got rid of Short Line Tower. We have some more shots of Short Line. Here we are. I'm on the west side of the tower, and we're looking, I'm on the east side of the tower, and we're looking west toward East 18th Street. And you see the stairway leading to the upper level of the tower, where the CTC machine is located. Again, it looks like most of the lines are in place, but as we get a couple more shots of Short Line Tower, you're going to see that those lines have been severed. This shot is from October the 12th, 1987, and you can see that the lines are being severed to the tower. A Northwestern truck in place and getting the tower ready to have the demolition crews come in and take care of it and take it to the ground. Here they are working on taking it to the ground. Bucket truck taking out the windows. The stake truck that is backed right up to the tower is going to take the CTC machine that's on the second floor to Boone. And I understand the CTC machine is still at Boone, but I've not seen it. But this is what I've been told by several of people who are more in the know than I. One last Iowa Interstate train came by the tower as they were tearing it down on October the 16th, 1987. And as I was looking at my notes, it dawned on me that that was my 10th wedding anniversary. Now, I'm not sure if my wife was unhappy with me for taking pictures of trains that day, but she knew that that's one of the things that I did. And I'm sure I probably made it up, or at least it was made up for me in some way, manner, and fashion. Boom Truck is working on the walls and is going to work on the roof so that the CTC machine can be removed. 464 is pulling the train as it comes by Short Line and one of the Iowa Interstate train crew. out taking pictures of what's going on. You get a good sense of what easy work, frankly, the boom truck is making of Short Line Tower on October 16th, 1987. Another shot of the tower as it's getting ready to go into oblivion. I always liked the structure. I thought it was a neat structure. I thought it just said, this is railroad. And it was a structure that exuded strength, in my opinion. And it controlled a lot of traffic through the junction, north-south Rock Island, east-west Rock Island, Chicago Great Western. You had Des Moines and Central Iowa, the interurban operation that was affected by it. And of course, you had then the Wabash to the south coming across. And so it was a busy, busy place. And I hated to see the structure go, but that's business, unfortunately.
It really does give you a sense of the scope of the CTC machine as well, that they literally knocked down a wall of the building to pull the whole CTC machine out.
Yes, and it was interesting to watch it go. Sad, but interesting. And here you get another shot of them working on taking things down. And by the end of the day, it was all gone. And everything was controlled by electronically. Here's 414, July the 1st, 1988. We are at East 18th Street. And don't know what else can be said, except it's a former Paducah Jeep. 405 is also in the consist, and it's in the Iowa Interstate colors that continue to be very familiar to us today. And well, again, you can see the always be careful that's printed on the front, on the pilot, and all of the accoutrements that go with a railroad locomotive, even one as old as this Paducah Jeep. Here's 430, again, East 18th Street. Get a little better shot of the consist. 401, 303, and there's another Jeep in the background, but don't have a complete picture of it. Seems to me, as I've gone through these particular slides, that 430 shows up on the point quite a few times. I don't know if that's because the engineers and the operating crews liked it, or it's just how it is that it showed up quite a little bit. Here's a short stack train, and this is 473 pulling it. This stack train is over at East 18th Street, waiting to get clearance into Short Line Yard, and it's going to be a short train, because as we'll see in the next picture, as there it goes, headed toward Short Line. And you also notice that it doesn't have an EOT. It's got a red flag on the end of the train. We're still early in the operations of Iowa Interstate. They haven't gotten their EOTs into position or into operation. This is December 22nd of 1988. Iowa Interstate operated a passenger special. I think it was for a group of touring individuals. And I caught them over at East 18th Street on May 28th, 1989. Overcast day. May seems to be more overcast now than it used to be, but this was a real overcast day in 1989. And you see 483 is going to take these passenger cars, and eventually it's going to go down the Altoona to Pella branch and come back. The engineer remarked to me, as I was there getting my pictures. I don't know why these guys want to go down the Altoona, down the branch to Pella. Number one, there's nothing to see, and it's 10 miles all the way, is how I remember what he had to say. But rail fans are funny people.
Yes. It was a leftover of the Rock Island operation down to Keokuk.
And, if you stop and think about it and look at the maps, had the old K&D stayed in place, it might have played a very critical role in the movement of coal and other commodities. But the problem was that the track had so deteriorated, particularly between Keokuk and Eldon, that it just couldn't be maintained. And here we get a back view of this passenger special, individual hanging out the door as it's headed toward Shortline and to Altoona, and eventually on its trip down the Altoona to Pella branch. And it looks like it's done some rain that day as well. Well, let's go to a sunny day. We're here at East 4th Street, over by the police station. You can see that in the background. 401's on the point, getting ready to come across into downtown Des Moines. You see a lot of cars parked nearby, and just a typical shot of a typical Iowa Interstate operation. This is on June the 9th, 1988. And it gives you a sense, I think, of a new railroad working hard, trying to make some money and trying to provide service. Here's 414 at basically the same location. You'll notice my Chrysler New Yorker is sitting over to the side. Ford pickup. I like to include vehicles in my pictures because I think it helps to give a sense of where we are and our time frame. You also get a sense here of 414 and how the paint is wearing off of the nose herald. We've got 405 in the back with the Iowa Interstate colors that we have come to know and appreciate. Here's 400. Downtown Des Moines. It's headed toward the bridge over the Des Moines River. 414 came from the Rock Island, and Tom has some statistics, I think, on this particular locomotive, Rock Island number and that sort of thing.
Yes, this was the Rock Island 1275, and we had a shot of this in Rock Island paint in the Larry Anglin show that we did of the Rock Island back in March. Or February it was, February. This originally was a high-nosed Jeep and was involved in an accident and rebuilt over at the Silva shops, as I recall correctly. And you'll notice that there's a taper on the nose rather than just a straight fit. And that's an interesting spotting feature for the 400 and makes it a very interesting locomotive in an interesting roster on the Iowa Interstate. Here we get another shot of 400. It's this one is taken at just a second here. I got to check my notes. We're in downtown Des Moines again.
I have this at 11th Street, westbound, on November the 4th of 1988. And again, you get it's got some stackers behind it, and the automobiles. As the second main line was pulled up, people started parking on the second main, or where the second main had been. And you would hear every so often on the police scanners that, well, we've got a car on the tracks. Are the police going to come and pull it? And sometimes they would. And then I'm told that there are other times that the individual who decided to park on the tracks ended up with a customized automobile after the train passed. Here's 401. We're at, I have it as West 8th and Mulberry. Actually coming close to the DMU yard. This is on 625-88. 401 again. Now it's coming into and going to go by the DMU yard. 401 with 464 and 303 in the locomotive consist as it's moving out toward the west. And this photograph was taken on June the 30th of 1988. A closer shot of 401 and 464. And again, we get the number boards clearer on 303 as the train is continuing to head westbound out of the downtown area of Des Moines. Here's the DMU office as it existed. The DMU tracks are no more. That whole area has been cleared out. You would not recognize it if you go down there. And basically, it's just the Rock Island or just the Iowa Interstate tracks that go through that area anymore. And we have another shot of the Des Moines Union. You see the Des Moines Union sign on the front of the building, and the pickup. You get a shot of the trackage, the yard trackage. Lots of ADM tank cars in the yard at that time, and then there's a diamond to the left of the building. I'll leave the experts among you to discuss where that particular track, which is crossing the Iowa Interstate main, at that point goes. It went down into an industrial area that is it would be to the Dyco plant, which that's the area that is the big Superfund cleanup. But again, we get a sense of how downtown Des Moines used to be back in the late 80s. Sperry rail car coming across from the west, checking for defects. This was later in the day on November the 3rd, 1988. I happen to like this shot because I get a good sense of the headlight on this particular car, and performs a very important function. 600, one of the first Jeep 38s that came to the Iowa Interstate. And what was it, Tom? Louisiana and somebody?
Yeah, or Mid-South, Mid-Louisiana. It came down from, it started out as a Conrail engine. It went to a short line operator in Louisiana, and then it ended up on the Iowa Interstate. Yes.
Okay. And you also have a Norfolk and Western, or actually Norfolk and Southern locomotive with a thoroughbred scheme in the background over on the DMU tracks.
Interestingly, another Jeep 38, but a high nose.
Yes, well, Norfolk and Western loved the high noses. I don't know that the engineers did, but the management did. And we're here at the Meredith plant, and that's the crosswalk that goes over the tracks to get to another parking lot. Here we have a reverse view of 600 on the point, again at the Meredith plant, 405, 457, and 451 in this consist, and it looks like it's primarily a grain train headed eastbound, headed into downtown Des Moines. This is, and I'm sorry I don't have a date for this particular picture, but it looks like it was a nice day.
Beautiful summer day is what I would assume.
Well, at least we've got a nice sky. Let's go out to Horse Barn Crossing. And this is one of the places that I liked to hang around back in the early days of the Iowa Interstate operations. The Horse Barn is to the right of the picture, and 468 is bringing a group of primarily hopper cars across at this crossing. To the left, where the line pole is, that's the Milwaukee line that goes up to Clive and on to, and eventually it went on to Perry, but of course it's been cut back. Served Grimes and elevators there. Iowa Interstate now serves that line, and primarily Pittsburgh Des Moines Steel. I think that's still the name of the steel plant out on the west side of town. And then I think it does go up a little bit further. I'll leave that to my expert friends who have been out doing a little more rail fanning recently than I have. Here we have 414 at the Horse Barn Crossing. That's Gary Cochran again. He's more awake this time as they're headed westbound and out of town. Let's go to 63rd Street in West Des Moines, and man, is this is a shocker for me. And the reason for that is that now 63rd Street in West Des Moines is all 4-lane. The crossing gates and signals are all the new modern high visibility units. You can see where the second main was. We've got stacked traffic behind the locomotives. And we have a motorist who's sitting there and saying, how long is this train going to be?
Yeah.
He wants to get that Volvo moving.
The classic question.
Get another shot of 468. This was taken on September the 16th of 1988. 600 finally got the Iowa Interstate paint job. Here it is out in West Des Moines at Emmons-St. L Junction. I think you can see the station sign for West Des Moines over to the left, and we've got 471 trailing. And here's 600 headed west out past the junction. We've got some railguns in storage over on the Emmons-St. L or Chicago Northwestern tracks. And we have 471 with 600 and 306 as the train heads out of West Des Moines. Here's 484, basically the same location in West Des Moines. I made the snide remark that you wouldn't think there would be gravel roads in West Des Moines, but there are, and they're right next to the tracks as 484 is headed westbound out of town.
Certainly anyone that lives there now would tell you there's not.
And we're looking many years ago. Pathfinder dinner train. Interesting operation. Here it is being pulled by 471. This is out by, this is west of the Emmons-St. L crossing near Fuller Road in West Des Moines. And of course, this area now has concrete and development and the whole ball of wax. The Pathfinder cars were painted in Iowa Interstate colors. Pathfinder operated out of Des Moines for a while. It operated out of Council Bluffs for a while. I don't know if it operated out of any other locations. My sense is that the Pathfinder operations ended because, and this is what I had heard through the rumor mill, that there were issues of payment for its operation on the Iowa Interstate. It was, my wife and I did it one time. It was okay, I guess. The food was basically catered in from Hy-Vee. The service was less than I would have desired, particularly given what she paid for the ride that we took. And so then I think we've got another shot of the Pathfinder. You get a little closer shot of the locomotives, or the locomotive and of the cars. From the Des Moines operation, it operated from downtown Des Moines, went out to DeSoto. They moved the locomotive around and then pulled it back into Des Moines. Here we have an interesting mix of locomotives. We have one of the Paducah Rebuilds in Iowa Interstate colors on the point, 408. This is over by Commerce. 900, the Alco, that was acquired from the Delaware and Hudson, or at least came off of the Delaware and Hudson, and was Fred Cheney's baby, if you will. And then a red-nosed, or a blood-nosed Southern Pacific unit that appears to be on lease. And this is out by Commerce. Here at Grand Avenue Crossing in West Des Moines, 408 on the point, and this is the same train that you saw in the previous slide. These were taken on December the 29th, 1989. Here's 431 and about milepost 370. The signaling, of course, when the Rock Island went defunct, the signals were turned so that supposedly the engineers couldn't see them. The signaling system was shut down. You can tell that there's been work performed on the tracks with ties. This photo from November the 9th of 1988, 431 on the point. There is a Milwaukee Bandit 963 in the middle of the locomotive consist. You never knew what you were going to see on the Iowa Interstate as they worked to, when they needed motive power, they found what they could. Remnants of the pole line to the right. 451, same location in June on the 15th of 1989. Looks like a solid consist of hoppers headed westbound. Here's Frank Taube on board 468, same day, 6/15, 1989, and at 471.6. You know, I try to get pictures of the crew as much as I can. Let's go to February the 23rd of 1989. Here's 468 East at Boonville, and we're going to catch a meet between 468 and 469. And here's the meet. 468 has some well cars. 469 with 404 appears to have a group of empty grain cars headed back out for distribution to the elevators along the line. Here's 408 on the Boonville Bridge. 900 is trailing. I've always liked the Boonville Bridge, the old one. And I understand why the need to replace it. But there was something very charming about the bridge at Boonville. And it will be missed. There's a similar bridge out east, and I need to get out there and get some pictures of it before it gets replaced.
Yes, our presenter last month, Mr. Kroger, had some photos of the new Boonville Bridge, actually, that's now in service.
Well, and, you know, things change, just like Short Line Tower had to go away. Here's the Pathfinder train going across the Boonville Bridge. You get a better picture of it. Lots of foliage. This is taken in June of 1989, June 17th of 1989. Here's 431 and another Milwaukee Bandit, maybe the same Milwaukee Bandit we saw previously. This is taken from the F90 bridge on November the 9th of 1989. I'm east of Casey with this shot, and here's 414 East, October 19th of 1989. Still a lot of green foliage, the remnants of the signal system, and 405 is one of the trailing units as 414 heads eastbound. 451 on the Middle River Bridge. 451's headed westbound. Again, the same date, October 19th, 1989. The Adair Depot, I mentioned that Charlie Crawford, who was Adair Feed and Grain, was on the Rail Finance Authority board. And this is part of the Adair Feed and Grain operation. The depot is in the middle of it, if you will. We'll take a trip over to Anita. And the depot there in Anita This was on I don't have a date of this particular picture. But again, I like the Rock Island depots. They had character. They were really thought through. And again, you also see some of the accoutrements that go with railroading. The station order boards, just a neat old brick depot. We're at Atlantic. Here's 900, and it's being pushed into position for a camera rail special that was being taken from Atlantic over to Council Bluffs. Now, 900 could not be operated by the engineer. You'll notice that the windshield on 900 is blacked out, and that's because they hadn't received the proper safety glass for it. Closer picture, giving you a sense of the locomotive. I always called that Fred Cheney's Alco. And my wife would say, George, you've been out railroading, haven't you? And I'd been on board 900 with Frank Talby and shooting the bull with him. And I'd say, well, how did you know? She said, your white shirt came back black because of all of the oil from the Alco. I guess that's why they named it an official steam locomotive, or at least Trains Magazine did.
Those Alcos were famously known for the greasy exhaust, for sure.
Absolutely. And again, we're moving the 900 into position for the trip. Here's 451 at Atlantic with 470 and 303, and appears that they've got, well, it looks like it's a mixed bag of what they're pulling. I see a flat car, I see a grain car, and I see some trailers on flat cars. And 451, at least, you see the IAS markings on the nose, and Iowa Interstate on the long part of the Jeep, the Paducah Rebuild hood. And again, you can see that they've been working on the track. We're now at Council Bluffs at the engine shops there. 600 hasn't received the Iowa Interstate paint job yet. Servicing facility, a lot of work, and I was at one time I was told that the guys at the Council Bluffs shop knew how to make the GEs work. That they kept the GEs when it was Rock Island running. And again, Iowa Interstate during this era was lean and mean, and they ran what they had, and they did it well. It was always interesting to watch the consists as they moved back and forth across the system. Another shot from the Council Bluffs yards. We have the 800. And this came from Canada, and that's one of the Canadian comfort cabs. I don't recall that these locomotives stayed around on Iowa Interstate all that long, but they were part of the eclectic mix that was the Iowa Interstate. And you get a sense of some of the equipment that's needed and necessary to keep a railroad like Iowa Interstate in operation, and the two-stall engine house.
I can tell you that I moved to Iowa City in 2001, and these Montreal Alcos were still running around at that time, the 801, 802, 803. And that was just prior to the Henry Posner taking over and really standardizing their roster.
Well, of course, as I recall, Fred Cheney loved Alcos. And that's why he acquired what I call the alligators off of Green Bay and Western, 900. But the problems with the Alcos was getting parts, particularly as they got older. 401 here at the Council Bluffs shops, 800 again, 850. Lots of wheel sets. Again, just gives you a sense of what is involved in railroading. Train to the game. operated by the Iowa Association of Railroad Passengers on September the 24th, 1988. The passenger consist included Pathfinder cars, a diner that was privately owned but marked for the Chicago South Shore, and then the Silver Solarium, which is the dome car, one of the California Zephyr dome cars. Here we have 468 and 402. They're getting ready to take this train back to the Kinnick Stadium station to be reloaded after the Iowa State game.
And it's interesting that Iowa Interstate was involved in this from very early on, and even through the Hawkeye Express, which has just been recently discontinued.
Iowa Interstate has been passenger and passenger special friendly. And I think that's what makes it a beloved railroad by many rail fans. Another review of 468 and 402 and the passenger consist. Excuse me. Here's 479 with 101 off the Krandick. Engineer Frank Taube is getting off the train. Just a minute here.
Yes, and we appear to be in the Iowa City area once again.
This is Iowa City, and this is going to be a special that's going to go from Iowa City over to Newton. I forget the occasion, but it was primarily to commemorate the Rail Finance Authority, Heartland Rail Partners, and all of the assistance that had been obtained. Get a wider shot of the locomotives, and you get a sense of the passenger consist.
Have a full-length dome car back there as well.
Yes, and Silver Solarium on the tail. 479 and looks spiffy. Now here's 71 before they started using the 400 series. The gentleman in the sport coat on the pilot is Tony Bassino. I became friends with Tony. He was one of the officers of the railroad, the public safety officers of the railroad. Frank Taube and Tony are exchanging remarks about something, I'm not quite sure what, and I'm afraid I don't know the other gentleman that's standing next to Frank. And again, we're at the Iowa City Depot. The Herald has gone off the front of the locomotive, but you get a sense of the Iowa City Depot and the people who are getting ready to board this train. Here's 403, 401, and another consist. This is, my notes say, this was a BN detour that is coming off of the Iowa Interstate, and it's going to go onto the Burlington Northern to go down to Albia and eventually to the main line. This was taken in 1993 during the flood season, and the train came across on Iowa Interstate. I can't recall if it came eastbound, if it came from the east to Des Moines, and then they turned it around. That doesn't make sense, though. I think it came from the west, probably because of flooding out around Emerson and that sort of thing. And then it was going to go onto the Burlington Northern, the line to Albia. This is July 9th, 1993. The floods caused havoc with everybody's railroad. Amtrak had been running across Iowa at the time on the Chicago Northwestern because of flooding on the Burlington Northern. Train was stranded because of flooding out west of Denison. They brought the train back to Des Moines. And here it is at Hull Avenue Yard. And it's going to be yarded so that passengers can be taken off and put on buses.
The Northwestern was apparently nice enough to supply some Jeeps for cab signals for these trips also.
Yes. Well, this was just an absolute emergency ferry move. And we get another shot. One of the locomotives has been taken off at this point. And you can get a sense of the amount of moisture that's in the ground by the water that's sitting between the tracks. Another shot giving you a sense of this was a pretty big Zephyr. And this was during a time when the Amtrak was trying to promote its express service. So there's a number of express cars on the head end of this particular train. This is taken from the Guthrie Street Bridge, the Guthrie Street overpass. And as I recall, the train was spotted in the area where you see the gravel to the left of the Superliner cars. And buses were brought in and the passengers were unloaded. And I believe that this shot is taken after all of the passengers have been unloaded, the buses have left, and they're getting ready to move the train down to Iowa Interstate. Reverse shot, same train, same basic location from the Guthrie Avenue overpass. And here are the buses that were used to load the passengers. The passengers ended up spending a lot of time on this train and not seeing much. The buses took the passengers to Omaha. The Amtrak locomotives and cars were then moved to Iowa Interstate. And this ferry move then occurred from Des Moines over to Council Bluffs.
So the reason for the ferry move then was because Amtrak had no contract with Iowa Interstate to move passengers, no insurance?
That was my understanding at the time. And of course they couldn't go west on the Northwestern. They couldn't go west on the Burlington. They, in all likelihood, couldn't have gone west on CC&P because of flooding out particularly in the western part of the state. And so we'll get some shots of the Amtrak train as it is coming across the state of Iowa from Des Moines west to Council Bluffs. Jim Tuttle was the pilot for this particular train. Here it is just west of Commerce. Still see some of the old line poles from the Rock Island days. And again, I think this gives you an impression or a shot of the head-end traffic that they had with those as they were promoting their express service. Here we are in Van Meter. No, the train did not stop at Casey's. Casey's was a favorite stopping point for Iowa Interstate crews. They would use the restroom facilities. They would get some snacks and then take off again. I don't know that they ever checked with the dispatcher to do that. Alan Hunt can probably add to that story, but that's perhaps for another presentation.
That isn't by chance your blue Trans Am over there on the side, is it?
No, I never had a Trans Am. I couldn't fit into a Trans Am. Okay, let's get another shot in here. This is west of DeSoto as the Amtrak train is moving along. As I recall, it was keeping a fairly steady pace, but I could get ahead of them using back road driving skills that you learn as a rail fan. And it was fun to chase this, just to get something that was highly unusual at this time on Iowa Interstate. Downtown Earlham, train is passing through. Again, not many people out on the streets to see something that was highly unusual. But I was there, and again, you can get a sense of how the ground is saturated with water by looking at the water along the right-of-way and the tower for one of the Iowa Interstate radio relays.
Yeah, we're just a couple of days beyond the quote-unquote high water mark of the flood that summer.
Yes, this is July 9th, 1993. And then we get a shot of the back of the train, again, as it passes through Irwin. County Road near Dexter. As the train approached a grade crossing just before crossing on the girder bridge over Interstate 80, there was a dump truck. And the guy decided he was going to beat the train. And I looked at Jim Tuttle and he looked at me, and they were laying on the whistle to beat the band. The guy made it across, but how, I'll never know. Gravel truck drivers are crazy people, is all I can say. And I hope I haven't offended any gravel truck drivers. Last series of shots of the Amtrak train in Stuart at the Stuart Depot as it's coming into Stuart and getting ready to continue its journey to Council Bluffs. And our final shot is the end of the train in Stuart. People at the grade crossing, I have a sense that they may wonder what in the world was a passenger train going through Stuart at this time of day and this time of year. And Tom, that's my presentation. I thank you for the opportunity to do so. I hope that the audience has enjoyed what we've been able to present. Again, I thank so very much my friends Dave Kroger and Dana Grief for, number one, encouraging me to get my slides out, and for Dave for scanning them in so that we could show them and present them for use. They don't do any good just sitting in boxes, and I've got more than I need to get out. So again, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, George. I'm sure everyone has very much appreciated this, and I hope that anyone that's able is going to come out to Grand Mound for our Depot Day in a couple of days and look for our second show. It's going to be a Galesburg theme toward the end of June. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in this afternoon.